The detector locks onto something Nic hasn't felt all week. Not the dull thud of iron. Not the hollow chatter of a surface rock. Something tight, dense, and consistent. The exact signature that every serious gold hunter in Australia recognizes as meaning one thing. He drops to his knees in the red dirt, scrapes back the surface layer, and pulls out a nugget that stops him cold. Then the detector screams again, for meters away. He digs. Another one. Then another. 3 nuggets and 6 meters of ground that the 1850s miners walked straight over and left behind. This isn't a lucky strike. This is a patch. A concentrated pocket of gold sitting untouched beneath Australian soil for over 170 years. And Nic has just found the edge of it. 150 years ago, the old-timers hit these hills and hit them hard, with nothing but picks and determination. But today, I'm going back. The blank days. Nic's channel doesn't hide the reality of how this actually works. He doesn't glamorize it. He doesn't skip ahead to the good moments and pretend the blank days never happened. Most prospecting trips produce nothing. Nic has spent 2-day stretches, fully documented on camera, finding absolutely nothing. Not a flake, not a speck. Just dry ground, a silent detector, and the discipline to keep moving. For years, I've kept one of these creeks up my sleeve. A place I've saved for a moment exactly like this. And until now, I haven't been able to get in. If I don't walk out of this creek with a bag full of gold nuggets, my gamble to travel Australia may just start to fall apart. Hours of working creek beds and hillsides and old workings in the Western Australian heat, digging signal after signal that produces nothing but corroded iron and discarded junk, then driving home with empty pockets. He covers kilometers on foot. He hauls gear into terrain most people never reach, down dry creek beds, up into ridgelines across country where the track disappears and the scrub takes over. The detector sweeps low and slow, coil overlapping coil, not missing a centimeter. A signal comes in. Nic stops, digs, and pulls up a bent piece of wire or a chunk of old iron, strapping from a mining operation dead for a century. He fills the hole, mentally notes the junk, and moves on. The first day of a trip like this can feel like walking in reverse. Every dig that comes up empty confirms that this exact piece of ground doesn't hold what Nic is after. And that confirmation is genuinely useful. It narrows the search. It eliminates the wrong areas and steers Nic toward ground that's different, geology that's carrying gold instead of silence. The blank days aren't failure. They're how Nic reads the landscape, eliminating territory, building a theory, narrowing toward the place where the geology shifts and the gold begins. Every dead stretch of ground is pointing somewhere. The question is whether a prospector has the patience to follow where it leads. And then, without warning, the ground answers. Why Australia is still a gold field. Australia's gold rushes began in the early 1850s. Hundreds of thousands of prospectors descended on Victoria and Western Australia, Ballarat, Kalgoorlie, Coolgardie, Bendigo. Towns erupted from bare earth. Fortunes were pulled from creek beds and reef lines by hand. And then the rush ended. The accessible gold was taken and the digging stopped. We plan to visit every gold field Australia has to offer, attempting to cross this entire continent, funded by gold alone. But the gold didn't stop. Gold migrates through the landscape over geological time, eroding out of reef structures, carried by water, settling into the lowest points of the terrain, in bedrock cracks, in the bends of ancient creek channels, in concentrated clusters that prospectors call patches or pay streaks. The 1850s miners were skilled at working what their tools could reach. What they couldn't do was detect a nugget sitting 30 centimeters below the surface, invisible beneath a layer of clay and gravel that looks from above exactly like everywhere else. That is the gap Nic exploits. High-frequency metal detectors, the technology that has transformed modern prospecting, can sense a small nugget at depth that would have been completely invisible to every miner who walked that same ground in 1855. Even the old Chinese dig sites, some of the most methodical workings of the gold rush era, left gold behind. Not through carelessness, through the limits of physics. We set off to find a lost Chinese gold field rumored to exist on this massive property. And after a few days of searching, we found them. We've now been here for 2 days, and we're pushing even further and deeper into the property. searching for lost Chinese gold and Chinese artifacts. Nic knows precisely which historical areas haven't been properly covered with modern detectors. He knows which terrain types concentrate gold and which don't. And on this trip, that knowledge brings him to a stretch of ground that hasn't yet surrendered its secrets. The method. Nic reads terrain the way a geologist reads rock, instinctively, from years of being wrong often enough to understand what right looks like. He isn't walking random ground. He's tracking the logic of how gold moves. Where creek channels slow and release their load, where bedrock ridges create natural traps, where old cairns and collapsed shaft heads mark the boundaries of historical workings that stopped before they found everything. Every indicator on the surface is a clue about what the ground is holding beneath it. A slight color shift in exposed soil. A change in rock type suggesting a different geological layer. The way the landscape funnels water, and therefore gold, into a specific low point that has been accumulating material for 10,000 years. Nic also follows the historical record. Old Chinese dig sites from the 1850s and 1860s are among the most interesting targets in Australian gold fields because those miners were methodical, patient, and thorough by the standards of their era. If a Chinese digger worked an area and moved on, it means he extracted what he could with hand tools and water. It doesn't mean he extracted everything. The gold sitting below the reach of a hand-dug shaft, or reading too faintly for the basic prospecting methods of that time, is still there. Nic knows which old workings haven't been properly covered with modern equipment, and he targets those areas deliberately. So far I've managed to find good gold near Chinese dig holes as well. But at this stage of the expedition, we're turning our attention toward the mountains, because that's where the biggest gold usually hides. Deep gold lying on the mountainside, covered by soil. But the single discipline that separates Nic from a casual prospector is simpler than terrain reading. He digs every signal, especially the faint ones. A faint signal in mineralized ground is easy to rationalize away. Probably iron, probably junk. Not worth the effort of digging a proper hole. But a faint signal can also be a nugget sitting in a crack in the bedrock. Small enough to read softly, heavy enough to change the entire day. Nic crouches. He digs. One faint signal. The detector has been running quiet. Hours into the session, it has produced a handful of iron targets. Old nails, wire, spent material from workings long abandoned. The sun is high. The ground looks no different from the ground 50 meters back that gave back nothing. Then the machine changes tone. Soft, uncertain, the kind of signal that vanishes if the coil angle shifts even slightly. Nic stops. He repositions his feet and sweeps back across the same patch of ground. The tone holds, faint, but consistent. And a consistent signal is a real signal. He crouches, scraping back the surface layer with his pick. The signal gets marginally stronger but maintains that same soft character. Not screaming, not confident. The kind of reading that rewards patience and punishes impatience in equal measure. Nic digs carefully, pulling material out in controlled scoops, checking each load with the pinpointer. The hole gets deeper. The signal shifts into the extracted material rather than the hole itself, which means the target is already in what he's removed. He runs the pinpointer through the pile of red dirt. It screams. Something small, something dense, comes out of the earth. Nic holds it up. The weight is unmistakable. Raw gold. A nugget rough-edged, heavy for its size, still carrying the color of the ground it came from. He stays still for a moment, reading the light on it. Now we believe we're right on top of it, standing above a gold field that hasn't seen light in over a century. And to give ourselves every chance of finding this deep gold, we brought the most powerful gold detector on Earth. He takes in the specific gravity of a metal that never lies about what it is. He's quiet for a beat. The camera captures it. Then he marks the hole and starts working in circles. Because here's what makes it more than just one good find. Gold doesn't travel alone. The patch. Gold patches form because of the physics of how gold moves. When a reef erodes over thousands of years, the gold it carries doesn't scatter evenly across the landscape. It concentrates, pooling in the same geological traps, settling into the same bedrock cracks, collecting in the same slow bends of ancient drainage lines. Where one nugget sits, the ground surrounding it is almost always holding more. Nic marks the first find and starts a tight grid, working meter by meter, coil overlapping coil, listening for what the ground is still keeping to itself. Second signal. He digs. Another nugget. Third signal. 4 meters from the second. He digs again. Gold. 3 signals within 6 meters, then a fourth. This gold discovery isn't like the others. Finding a few pieces of gold in a river isn't a rare event, but finding hundreds of pieces within just a few meters of each other is truly something special. The detector is talking faster than he can process. Every depression in the bedrock, every crack along the ridge, every low point in the ancient drainage line, the ground is giving them up one after another, each one adding to Nic's understanding of this location. He's not in a lucky spot. He's in a patch, a genuine pay streak, a concentrated cluster of gold that has been sitting in this ground since the last time this landscape flooded. And nobody has ever stood in exactly this place with exactly this technology before. This is the moment that reframes everything that came before it. Every blank day, every junk dig, every hour of silence that tested Nic's conviction about this location. It was all building toward this. The patch doesn't care about the blank days. It has been here the whole time, waiting in the bedrock, patient in the way that only something geological can be patient. Nic found it because he was willing to stay when the ground was saying nothing, because he dug the signal the ground was whispering instead of shouting. The math changes fast when a patch opens up. And this one is still open. What Nic pulls out. Gold pricing moves with global markets, but Australian nuggets from productive gold fields carry real and immediate value. A solid nugget of a few grams at current spot prices is already worth several $100s. A cluster of nuggets pulled from a genuine patch, multiple pieces, multiple digs, all from the same geological concentration, starts reaching numbers that make the weeks of blank days feel like a very sound investment. Nic doesn't leave patches early. He works the edges. He expands the grid. He digs everything the detector identifies until the ground goes quiet. On a productive day in the Australian gold fields, a single pay streak can yield multiple ounces of gold. At current prices, that translates directly into thousands of dollars recovered from terrain that every 19th century miner wrote off as exhausted and finished. The nuggets Nic pulls from this patch aren't just valuable by weight. Each one is confirmation that the geological read was correct, that this particular piece of ground, chosen from hundreds of kilometers of available terrain, chosen on the basis of reading historical workings and understanding how gold moves, was the right call. The skill that brought Nic to this location is embedded in every piece he holds up to the camera. But the value of what Nic finds today isn't only in the gold he can weigh. It's in what the patch itself implies. Multiple nuggets concentrated this tightly means the geological structure beneath is productive. The bedrock below may be holding more than the surface layer has yet released. The adjacent ground, if it carries the same geology, may be just as loaded. What looks like a great day's prospecting is actually the opening chapter of what this location might ultimately produce. Nic knows that. He photographs the area, notes the terrain features, records the coordinates. He'll be back. Why remote terrain pays off. Part of what makes today's discovery possible is where Nic is willing to go. The accessible gold fields, areas reachable on a half-day drive from a major town, ground close to sealed roads, have been worked over by thousands of recreational prospectors across decades. There's still gold in those areas, but the easily concentrated deposits have been hammered hard. Finding a genuine patch there requires exceptional skill and exceptional luck working together. Nic goes further, hours out on unsealed tracks, into creek systems and terrain that see almost no recreational detector traffic. The remoteness is the entire point. Ground that's hard to reach is ground that's received less attention. And in a country the size of Australia, sitting atop some of the most gold-rich geology on Earth, there is no shortage of remote country that hasn't been properly worked with modern equipment. I'm not here to play it safe. I'm here to pull gold from the depths and let it see sunlight for the very first time. Consider what that actually means at scale. Western Australia's Goldfields region, the area stretching from Kalgoorlie out through Southern Cross, Leonora, and Laverton, covers an area larger than most European countries. The historical workings from the 1850s rush covered only a fraction of the terrain where gold actually exists. The prospectors of that era went where they could physically get to, worked what they could physically reach, and moved on. When a claim ran dry by the standards of hand tools and basic water equipment, the surrounding and intervening landscape was never fully investigated. Still hasn't been. Nic researches historical records and geological surveys to identify areas where the old workings stopped. Not because the gold stopped, but because the technology stopped. Those boundaries are where the modern detector carries the greatest advantage. The ground on one side of that line was worked. The ground on the other side, geologically identical, was not. The patch Nic finds today sits in terrain exactly like that. Ground that looks from the surface like everywhere else. Ground that gave up nothing to everyone who came before it. Ground that requires a modern detector, the knowledge to interpret its signals, and the willingness to dig every single one of them, to reveal what it has been holding since the 1850s. The ground beneath the ground. Here's what Nic understands about a find like this that changes how the rest of the day is played. When a patch yields multiple nuggets on the surface, found within meters of each other, sitting at varying depths, it points to something specific about the geological structure underneath. The gold didn't arrive here randomly. It was deposited by water moving through a specific channel, under specific conditions, over extended time. That channel has edges. That structure has depth. The bedrock below the surface layer may hold concentrations the detector can't fully read through the overburden above. The standard move at this point, for a prospector who knows what he's looking at, is systematic expansion. Nic works tight circles outward from the cluster. He tests the ground uphill, downhill, along the drainage line, searching for where the patch ends. Sometimes it ends quickly. Sometimes it doesn't end at all within the range he can cover in a single session. Each new signal adds information. Each nugget he recovers confirms the geological read. Each empty dig maps the boundary of the productive zone. By the time Nic packs up at the end of the day, he doesn't just have gold in his bag. He has a detailed working knowledge of a location that may produce across multiple return visits. Welcome to our beautiful country, Australia. Picturesque, remote, and most importantly, rich with gold. Gold in Australian alluvial terrain is often layered. The same geological event that deposited gold at one depth frequently deposited gold at multiple depths, stacked in the bedrock wherever the terrain provided a natural trap. A shallow patch found by a surface running detector can be sitting directly above a deeper concentration that requires a different coil setup to reach. Nic knows this. He'll come back with a larger coil configured for deeper penetration and run it across the same ground. The find today is the first chapter. That's how a single faint signal turns into something that deserves the word incredible. What real prospecting looks like. Nic's channel, How to Find Gold, does something genuinely rare in prospecting content. It documents the entire process, not just the payoff. Every trip goes on camera. The blank sessions go on camera. The junk digs go on camera. The decisions about when to move and when to stay, which terrain to prioritize, how to interpret what the ground is signaling. All of it documented under real conditions with real equipment in the remote Australian terrain where real gold still waits. That matters because the technique Nic uses is visible and repeatable. Watching him approach a patch reveals the thinking behind every move, where he positions the coil, how he responds when the tone changes, how he isolates the target in the extracted material rather than chasing it back into the hole, how he expands his grid once the first find confirms the location is worth pursuing. These aren't tricks or shortcuts. They're the skills that separate a productive session from a blank day, built through repetition in terrain that punishes guesswork. Nic also documents the equipment he runs and how he tunes it for different ground conditions. Highly mineralized soil, the kind common throughout Australian gold fields, can mask real targets or generate false signals that send a less experienced prospector chasing junk all day. Getting the ground balance right, choosing the correct frequency for the depth and target size being hunted, understanding how the soil's mineral content affects the detector's response. This is the technical foundation that everything Nic finds is built upon. Join us now as we take you on the most epic hunt for gold. And watch until the end if you want to see the biggest, best find yet. I think you're going to love it. He walks through all of it on camera, in context, with actual results showing why it matters. What Nic documents on this trip isn't a lucky day. It's the outcome of knowing where to go, knowing how to interpret what the detector is telling him, and refusing to walk past the signal that everyone else would have dismissed. The gold was always there. Nic found it because he was the one who dug. The patch isn't finished. Nic loads his finds at the end of the session. Multiple nuggets. Real weight. A location mapped, photographed, and understood. But the patch isn't finished. The edges haven't been fully worked. The bedrock hasn't been reached. The adjacent ground, the terrain just uphill from the main cluster, following the same drainage logic that deposited the gold in the first place, hasn't been covered yet. In Australian gold fields, a surface patch that yields this kind of density almost always holds more underneath. The same geological event that concentrated gold at one depth often layered it at multiple depths, wherever the bedrock provided a natural trap. Nic has found the top of something. How deep it runs and how far it extends is a question the next visit will begin to answer. He'll go back with a different coil configuration targeting the deeper material. He'll grid the adjacent ground systematically. He'll dig everything the detector identifies, because one of those faint signals in the ground surrounding this patch might be the richest piece of all, sitting quiet and deep in a bedrock crack, waiting for someone with the right equipment and the right discipline to finally pull it out. The find was extraordinary. The location is real. And Nic is going back. That's what this channel documents. Not the dream of gold, but the actual work of finding it. The method, the terrain, the patience, and the moments when the ground finally pays off. Subscribe so you're there when the next layer opens up. Because in ground like this, what comes next might make today look like the warm-up.